Good afternoon, students. Today we will start a new chapter, that is assert early nationalist. In our previous chapter, we have discussed the factors that led to rise of nationalism, where we have discussed certain points that what were the factors that led to the rise of nationalism, like the economic exploitation by the British, repressive policies of Lord Lytton, then role of press, then socio-religious movement, etc. Now in this chapter we will discuss about the early nationalist. So as you know that the Congress, which was formed in 1885, was divided into three phases. The first phase was known as the moderate phase, which was from 1885 to 1905. The second phase was known as the assertive nationalist, that is 1905 to 1918. And the last phase came to be known as the Gandhian era, that is from 1919 to 1947. So the Congress phase can be divided into these three periods: the moderate phase, the early nationalist, radical nationalist, and the Gandhian era. So today we will discuss about the early nationalist leaders. The early nationalist leaders who dominated the Congress policies during the first phase of the Indian National Congress, that is from 1885 to 1905 of the national movement, were called the moderates, or they were also known as the early nationalists. So this period is known as the moderate phase. Now why this period is known as the moderate phase? Because it was during this period the prominent leaders of the Congress, their policies were very moderate in nature. They never went for confrontation, rather they went for conciliation. They never wanted the British to leave India. They wanted the British to stay in India because they had immense faith in the British sense of justice and loyalty on the British. So they wanted that let the British be in India, and it is the Britishers who will help India to be governed on the Western standards as the Britishers have done in their own country. Now this phase, the prominent leaders were Dadabhai Nauroji, Justice M.G. Ranade, then Firoz Shah Mehta, Surendranath Banerjee, R.C. Datta, Anand Charlu, and Gopal Krishna Gokhale. So these were the few leaders who were considered to be the pioneers of the early nationalists, and they were the one who actually guided the Congress during this phase. Next we have the belief of the early nationalists. What was the belief of the early nationalists? What was there? They had faith in honesty, integrity, and justice and fair decision of the Britishers. So according to them, the Britishers were always fair to them. They had trust in the British rule and the benefits that came with it. For example, the abolition of social evil practices like sati, child marriage, and untouchability. Because of these certain factors, the moderates had immense faith in the British sense that it was the Britishers who came and did certain social reforms, the cleansing of the society, or whatever the evil practices that was existing in the society was cleaned by them. They believed that the British would help India in governing herself as per the Western standard. That I have already said, that they believe that it is the Britishers who will help the Indians to rule India on the standard of the Western style. They hoped that the British would eventually grant home rule to the Indians and trusted in the British government organization and their solemn pledges. So what is the home rule? It was Annie Besant and Bal Gangadhar Tilak who started the Home Rule League movement. Now Home Rule League movement, Annie Besant, a lady from Ireland. In Ireland, at a point of time, Ireland was also one of the colonies of the British. Like other colonies, there were certain colonies like Australia, Newfoundland, South Africa. So these were the colonies of the British. They were known as the white colonies. Now the difference between these colonies and the colony in India was, Afro-Asian colonies was, in those white colonies they were given the dominion status. That means they had their own government also under the British. But in India, the people demanded for the dominion status, and the Indian people wanted a dominion status like that existed in these white colonies. So that was known as, for that, in India, Bal Gangadhar Tilak along with Annie Besant started the Home Rule League. and the moderates also had immense faith in the British promises, believed in reconciliation and patience. Now, early nationalists, they believed in patience, reconciliation, and they were opposed to violence and had faith in constitutional and lawful method in order to achieve their goals. They also believed in they believed that the socio-economic backwardness of India was the chief hindrance to the growth and development of India. They believed that it was not the British rule for which India was so economically backward. According to them, India's economic backwardness, social backwardness lies in the fact that India was economically backward. But the real fact was India was economically backward or socially backward. This was because of the fact of the British rule in India. But the early nationalists were not ready to accept this view. They said, according to them, it was the economic backwardness of India which was a big hindrance for the improvement of India or development of India. Next comes the constitutional demands. We have certain constitutional demands which was made by the early nationalists. The first point, they demanded the abolition of the India Council. Now, what is this India Council? In 1858, after the revolt of 1857, when the Queen Victoria Proclamation was signed in 1858, one of the clauses was that a viceroy will be appointed in India. There will be a Secretary of State. Under the Secretary of State, there will be a 15-member Executive Council. So, entire this administration to look after India came to be known as the India Council. Now, the problem was that a huge salary was drained away from India to give to the officers of the India Council. So, that was a loss for the country. Next, they petitioned for the expansion of the Legislative Council and the Legislative Assembly. So, their main demand was to increase more membership in the Legislative Council and the Legislative Assembly and not the independence of India. So, they only believed in the constitutional demand. They demanded the introduction of the direct system of election and a larger share for the Indians in the Legislative Council. So, their main demand was constitutional. They wanted the representation of more members in the Legislative Council and the Legislative Assembly. But later they put forward the claim of Swarajya within the British Empire. So they didn't want full complete independence. They wanted Swarajya or self-rule, but within the British rule. And the last, they demanded adequate representation of Indians in the Executive Council of the Viceroy and the governors. So their demands were very feeble and their demands were very weak. This was nothing to do with the independence of India. Administrative reform, they asked for the Indianization of the civil service examination. What is the meaning of Indianization of the examination? Because previously the UPSC, the ICS exam, you have read when I was explaining you about Lord Lytton's repressive policies. Lord Lytton reduced the age for sitting in the ICS examination from 21 to 19, just to debar the Indians from sitting in the exam. This is one point. And secondly, during those days, ICS examination was held only in London. This was done intentionally just to debar the Indians from sitting in the exam, because at that time it was not possible for all the people, Indian people, because most of them were poor, to go to London and give the exam. Naturally, so that the Indians cannot give the exam, that's why it was made only in London. But later on, one of their demand was to make examination both in India as well as England. Secondly, they demanded that the high grades, high posts were previously only reserved for the Britishers. They demanded that the job be given on the merit basis and not on the basis of either British or Indian. Next point is that the petition for separation of executive and the judiciary. Because if executive and judiciary is together, then there will be delay in the administration of law and high cost of the judicial process. So executive and the judiciary must be separated. They also wanted more powerful local municipal bodies and lesser official control over them. So many points. They also, very, very important, they asked for the repealing of the Arms Act and the License Act. The Arms and the License Act, which was passed during the time of Lord Lytton, they demanded for the removal or repealing the Arms Act and the License Act. Then they also emphasized to spread education among the masses. They also took the cause of the plantation worker. Plantation workers means people who were working in the tea garden and the coffee garden. So they were known as the plantation workers. So to take care of these people also one of their demand. Next, the economic reforms of the In economic reform, the demand reduction in heavy land revenue, which was imposed on the people. As a result, when they found no other way, they went to the moneylenders, and the moneylenders demanded a huge, or they put an exorbitant tax. So at a point of time when the people were unable to pay this tax, they had to pay off their sale of their land. They also asked for reduction in expenditure on the army, and instead spending the huge amount of money that was spent on the army to be used for the development of the country. They demanded the development of modern industries in India for the eradication of poverty. Because if more industries are opened, then it will provide employment opportunity to the people. They asked for an inquiry into India's growing poverty and famine. So what was the real reason behind India's poverty and famine? The early nationalists asked the Britishers to create or to set up a committee to find out the real reason that why India's so much poverty and famine was there. So these were some of the demands of the early nationalists. From next day, again we will discuss about, in my online class, I will discuss about the method of struggle of the early nationalists. Till then, I am completing my video here itself.